Hello and welcome to Making Media Now, the Filmmakers Collaborative podcast. I'm your host, Michael Azevedo. Joining me on this episode is first-time filmmaker Nivi Warches, the director and executive producer of a powerful and thought-provoking new documentary called Degree Burnout. The film uncovers the hidden connections between personal burnout and the climate crisis, revealing them as symptoms of a larger socio-economic metacrisis. With world-class animation, engaging interviews with over 20 experts, and playful humor woven into thought-provoking skits, the film breaks down complex ideas into something accessible, relatable, and impactful. From the history of our food systems to the ripple effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the intersections of healthcare, politics, and society, this documentary offers a fresh lens on the systemic forces shaping burnout. Here's the trailer.
In the heart of the United States, a crisis is brewing. 87% of us have encountered nature's fury. 60% of Americans are grappling with at least one chronic illness. The same percentage are also dealing with burnout.
We are burning out these bodies through horrific working conditions.
We're talking in the hundreds of thousands a year.
They're choosing not to have children. I don't think that we're going back to normal.
What's going on?
Oh, we could drop dead at any second.
We're questioning everything.
It's pretty much out of control.
It's leading to the degradation of the planet we live on.
We should probably just, take a breath and learn a bit more, right? Ready?
In 2020, Nivi lost her father to COVID-19 while she was in the process of struggling through her own burnout after 15 years in high-pressure global marketing and strategy roles across consumer packaged goods, life sciences, and media. That dual reckoning, grief and exhaustion, became the catalyst for her life's new direction, uncovering the connections between personal well-being, food systems, and planetary health, all of which are explored in Degree Burnout. Making Media Now is sponsored by Filmmakers Collaborative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting media makers from across the creative spectrum. From providing fiscal sponsorship to presenting an array of informative and educational programs, Filmmakers Collaborative supports creatives at every step in their journey. To learn more, visit filmmakerscollab.org. And as always, if you're enjoying this podcast, please do like, share, follow, leave a review. Now on to my conversation with Nivi Warches. Nivi Warches, welcome to Making Media Now.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
It's a pleasure to be speaking with you about your film, Degree Burnout, which is I am underselling it by calling it a comprehensive documentary about the hidden connections between personal burnout and the climate crisis, which you're revealing them as a symptom of a larger socioeconomic metacrisis. And we're going to take a deep dive into sort of the thesis of the film in just a minute. But share with listeners and myself a little bit about your story, because compared to a lot of the filmmakers, particularly documentary filmmakers that I speak with on Making Media Now, yours is a little bit different in terms of the path that you've taken. So bring us up to speed maybe on your story from a professional and a personal standpoint.
Before I could even call myself a filmmaker, I was a consumer marketeer. And that is where a majority of my career lies or lay before I transitioned to being a nonprofit owner, nonprofit founder, and started doing research during the pandemic, leading up to a national research study. We're actually the largest study on diet, burnout, food choices, and infectious disease recovery. And then events that followed made it clear that we had to tell the story in a more accessible format, leading to the creation and production of this feature documentary film, Degree Burnout. I started, as someone who's very deeply interested in the human experience, specifically in consumer psychology, and that's where my first degree is in psychology, a minor in economics, and then I went on to get an MBA degree in consumer behavior marketing, sales, and distribution management, and so on, and started working for this behemoth consumer brands, giant, and worked across personal care, personal cleansing, tea, tea-based beverages, and foods, spreads and dressings categories, what have you, and then transitioned to marketing medical devices and life sciences and so on, and then ended up in a market research firm and that kind of thing. So it was all connected to brands, brand strategy, consumer behavior, but with an emphasis on health and wellness as best as the industry can define. And we know that industry tends to have purpose and mission, as they call it, brand mission, but oftentimes it's in the service of profit, and you can't blame them for it, because these are giant enterprises that are designed to operate in a certain way, manufacture, market, and promote themselves in a certain way. But I just increasingly got disillusioned, and part of my personal journey was also a set of personal diagnoses that I received about 10 years ago. And with lifestyle change, I was able to reverse a lot of those, complaints, and escape the pharmaceutical pipeline, so to speak. And that really motivated me to rethink and relook at how I was spending my time, energy, and money.
So you mentioned that you worked on behalf of kind of industry giants. What was more of the allure for you, the sort of the intricacies of consumer behavior, or the products themselves that you were part of helping to market and essentially sell to the world?
I would say both, because as a consumer, before you become a consumer marketeer, you are a consumer of these products. So there's already a brand equity, that gets created in your own mind. And then there are certain brands that have been historically around us, especially household names, the kinds of brands that P&G owns or Unilever owns and Danone owns, Coca-Cola, Pepsi. A lot of these over the past 100, 200 years have been around, and they've shaped civilization, dare I say, and I feel that a lot of the times these organizations, they also develop an employer brand for themselves. And that's heavily marketed in the business school ecosystem. So on campus, there's a lot of messaging that's inescapable. As a student, you receive pre-placement talks and a lot of opportunities to be an apprentice or an intern with these organizations. So that was the allure. I think it begins far before you even consider getting a business degree. You are first marketed to as a consumer, and then you're marketed to as a potential employee who can contribute to that brand's history. And just case in point, the first ever brand that I worked on is the largest antibacterial brand in the world, and it's one of the oldest. And it was actually a colonial brand. It arrived, I'm originally from India, and originally it arrived in India in 1865.
Okay.
And there's a museum in the UK that's dedicated to this brand. It's called Lifebuoy. It used to be marketed and sold in the United States a long time ago. I think it's now called Lever 2000 or something like that. But it was something that on voyages, that the British undertook all the way to India and other places. And the sailors needed, I guess, personal hygiene and that kind of a thing. And that's how it initially started. So it's really interesting to work on some of these historical brands and learn about how they're marketed even today.
Yeah, and you mentioned a little while ago how the employers, when they're recruiting talent out of, I assume, MBA programs, they are projecting an employer brand. What attributes within an employer brand were you looking for?
I'm always enchanted by history, so
Mm,
if there is history behind a brand, that to me offers a great level of depth and substance. It also tells me that the brand has been able to sustain itself over a period of time and be able to still hold on to its relevance and its distinctiveness. It's still competitive in the marketplace as potentially it may have been 100 years ago, 150 years ago. So that was part of, the attribute. I think, as a young business school student about to graduate, you're also looking at what is the best introduction to consumer marketing that you can receive that can give a foundation to your career. And that was another attribute that I looked at, and scale, the scale of operations, the degree of autonomy, but at the same time, an understanding of how to brand something, how to communicate, how to tell a story. And typically with commercial advertising, you have to tell a story in under 30 seconds. And that's a feat.
right.
So a lot of those attributes attracted me.
Did you have an understanding of, or even did you even have was it even relevant to you to think about maybe what the perceived covenant was between employer and employee? And I ask the question because, we're going to be talking about burnout, which is often the byproduct of who holds the leverage in that relationship, essentially.
I think it was a given. Because like when you're in burnout, that's Freudian slip. When you're in a business school, you're burnt out already.
Okay. So you got a preset on burnout.
Yes, and it's a
So it's the
badge of
price you pay, in other words, to enter the business world, the corporate world at a particular echelon.
yes, and sadly enough, and I would also say that it's a badge of honor.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So if it's
Say more about
attractive,
that, the badge of honor part.
it's attractive to be the last one at work. It's attractive to be spending and burning the midnight oil, and tucked away in a university library. Um, Somebody who's sort of over delivering all the time in projects or taking on a lot of things so that you maintain your resume and be marketable
Hmm.
and ensure that you not only have curriculum covered, but you also have co-curricular activities covered. So you're part of the debating society. You're part of, I was doing sports. I was doing dance. I'm trained in two different types of classical dance, and and then I was also participating in the debate and declamations, and elocution and all of those things and public speaking, and at the same time working on, getting a degree, and and the electives, right? The more that you can fill your basket, then you're already kind of um, you're coming into work with a toolkit.
Hmm.
And then I guess that when you haven't ever worked before because you're just young, fresh graduate, then a lot of these companies can receive that training that you received on campus and shape you into whatever their brand culture is
Hmm.
more easily and make you a soldier. So typically, I feel in hindsight that it's a handoff. It's a handoff from the business school culture that rewards burnout to the corporate culture that also rewards burnout. And you're young, your metabolism is, quick, and you're motivated, you're driven, you want to see the world, you want to travel, and all of a sudden, you're brought into this lifestyle which pays the bills. You get financial independence. You have business class trips that are, booked by travel desk, and you're just handed this ticket and you go and fly to these different markets. So it's a ticket to um, financial success. It's a ticket to a lot of learning, but it comes at a huge cost. And as with anything that's chronic, like chronic illness, burnout doesn't appear on day one. You sort of, you're cooked into it.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Incrementally. Absolutely. And was it your experience that there was acknowledgement of this trade-off, between yourself and maybe your colleagues or maybe your fellow students when you were in graduate school? In other words, this is the way the game is played, essentially. And that if you want to work for the quote unquote best, you have to show yourself as someone who's going to go above and beyond 24/7. And what might start as kind of an internally driven, sense of vitality becomes something that, if introspection is allowed, if you start to measure that equation, the employee is often on the downside of that equation.
Eventually, yes, and definitely that was the case in my case, in my situation, and I think that nothing much has changed, and I don't want to blame business schools for it or corporations for it. I would say that this is a tale as old as time. We have a lot of sayings and proverbs in society around no pain, no gain. The early bird catches the worm, all of those things. And then if your personality is, sort of shaped out of family culture, work culture, role modeling that parents may have, demonstrated as you're growing older, things that you were sort of rewarded for and not rewarded for, you develop this need for achievement. And a lot of that talent pipeline that gets into business schools, that gets into medical schools, that gets into law schools, really universally are persons who are willing to do that. And then companies specifically go recruit and develop employer brands for these sorts of places. So the pipeline continues. And then I think that around mid-management is when typically there are these internal messages around the need for work-life balance that start to emerge. And because if there was no burnout, probably we wouldn't be talking about work-life balance.
Correct.
If that balance was already there. And so there is that tacit or active, depending on the work culture of the organization, acknowledgement of work-life balance. But is
was the need for a work-life balance something that you were hesitant to admit to yourself, and then perhaps even more hesitant to vocalize to colleagues or your employers?
I don't think so. I think there's a lot of conversation. Nothing stops conversation. We all talk about the need for health, for instance. The issue, and we discussed this in the film as well, the issue isn't, are we talking about it? The issue is, are we walking the talk? And is the system built such that you can stop talking about it and then do something about it?
Yep.
And that may be highly variable depending on the organization and the work culture. Sometimes it just comes down to the boss that you have, right?
Sure.
And people join great companies, they leave bad bosses, and that's another saying.
Yeah, so the brands that you work for were global in nature, and so I'm assuming that the observations you were making, the recommendations you were making around consumer behaviors were also global in nature. How much differentiation between consumer behavior, and I know this is a very complex question that I'm asking you to boil down, but the differentiation between consumer behavior, say country to country, how did that correlate, do you think, between people's behavior as consumers and people's behavior as, say, employees of corporations? And I'm asking this question because I'm trying to arrive at your take on the how globally resonant the definition of burnout is.
That is a big question. So I'm going to unpack this in maybe 3 parts. Number one, there is an overlap between consumer and employees in a consumer marketing firm. And the overlap is that I might be selling you a soap or a shampoo or a mayonnaise. I'm also consuming those categories, but I'm also marketing you those categories. So there's that one point that's important to understand. The second is that global trends, there are some trends that are universal, whether we acknowledge them or not. For instance, climate change. It is a global, universal phenomenon, right? The expression of some of these trends can be different, and then the reception that these trends receive regionally can vary by a lot sometimes. That is the second point. The third is solutions that these regional mindsets come up with to deal with something like burnout or deal with something like a perceived real or imaginary imbalance in their life, and therefore a product is needed to meet that need, right? Sometimes that can be global, and sometimes it can be regional, and those regional flavors and nuances are typically built into these large global brands. Because you could have a global campaign, but you also have regional campaigns that speak to those nuances. So if somebody is experiencing burnout and the solution, and I'm just sort of cooking this up on a fly, right? So if somebody's burnt out and we say, oh, you know what, I'm so burnt out, I've been working all week, and all I want is comfort food for the weekend. And you look at this company that manufactures, prepackaged food and ultra-processed food, and all you need to do is put it in a microwave, heat it up, and you're all set. They're going to capitalize on this global trend of burnout. Yeah. But if you're in the United States versus if you're in the Philippines, if you're in South Africa, or if you're in India, ingredients might be different, flavors might be different. Some of the advertising that you hear on the radio or you see on television might be different, following from that product mix.
Right, because the key word in that phrase that you just used was the comfort part, and the individuals are going to derive comfort differently from culture to culture, from country to country, and that's where the consumer marketing experts such as yourself, they're able to zero in on that. So this is a good jumping off point, maybe, to the film again, which is called Third Degree Burnout. Tell me about first and second degree burnout, and then how those add up to or lead to third degree burnout.
When, as a creative team, we were thinking about the naming of the film, we were looking at, number one, the intensity of the feeling that it has reached with a certain demographic, and it's increasing at this point in time. And we thought about third degree burns, and therefore third degree burnout.
Sure.
So there's an allusion to that in the name of the titling preference of the film. The other thing that we looked at was this framework that was born out from our research as an intact team, and we were looking at, when did burnout start? A lot of documentary filmmaking is investigation, and you go back in time and you start to understand, when did it start? What might have been an inflection point? Are there pre-existing research studies that talk about certain types of burnout? And we did find a lot. There is in public health, there is a framework around epidemiological transitions that human civilization has experienced over a long period of time, and they go back in deep history and look at how our species has developed, how we've started to manipulate our environment, from domesticating plants, domesticating animals, and so on. And what we were trying to do, obviously, was to not only look at a framework of degrees in terms of epidemiology or public health, but we were also trying to overlay upon that a framework that could explain planetary health and planetary degradation. And one of the big questions that we had was, do they map cleanly and neatly upon each other.
Yeah.
And one of the big discoveries that we made during our research of the documentary film was that they do. And it was very interesting that that led to this development of the framework of the first degree of burnout, when as collectively as a human civilization we may have achieved it, and then the second degree and the third degree. And obviously the third degree alludes to the most recent global pandemic, which is a watershed moment, and where we've entered into this phase of what now, after this high intensity third degree of burnout has been achieved.
And I know that there were some personal events in your life that also constituted a bit of a tipping point, wherein the reality of the severity of burnout, just at least for you, could not be ignored anymore, and perhaps was the impetus for the more exhaustive research that you went into. So share with us a bit of that story, if you would.
My father had chronic diabetes. But he was first diagnosed when I was 10 or 11 years old. So you can imagine that when I think of my father, I think of him surrounded by different specialists, always with certain pills, almost always either the medicine would be changed or would be sustained over a long period of time. So he had been on different medicines and pills and injections and insulin injections for a very long period of time. And the pandemic was a big turning point, because we know that persons with underlying advanced comorbidities who potentially were already immunocompromised would be impacted worse. So I lost my dad to the pandemic, and this was early on. It was August 2020.
What was your dad's attitude essentially toward his health? Did he consider somebody who, had to live with this chronic condition, but it was manageable, or was he someone that perhaps did not give it the attention that was necessary because it was taking him away from other objectives?
I think it was a bit of both. But the big thing is, what is it that the system, especially the healthcare system, that tells us about chronic illness? And that shapes how we think about a diagnosis such as this, and how we respond to a diagnosis such as this, and also how we manage it. And the big myth around type 2 diabetes mellitus is that it's hereditary. There's another big myth around it's a lifelong albatross around your neck that you have, and you can't shake it off, and that now you're stuck. And all you can do is manage your blood glucose levels, and that's when you get into dietary prohibitions, you get into regulating what you can and what you can't do, risk of bleeding. So, and then every individual responds and reacts to it very differently. So given that context, back in 1991, when he was diagnosed, and obviously there had to have been certain precursors, and we know it's a lifestyle illness, so there are certain precursors that led to it, and there's a certain lifestyle that led to it. And he was an anthropologist, very well read, well loved by his students, but sedentary.
Okay.
So he didn't have a lot of activity in his work. He would be either sitting and writing papers or delivering research and papers and courses in different universities. And he had a great love for food, and he had a great love for comfort food. And so when you have a mentally fatiguing lifestyle, which can come with being a researcher and a professor and an educator in universities, teaching grad school and PhD scholars, I think, what then does tend to happen is, unless you're really focused on activity, unless you're really focused on a healthy lifestyle, you can soothe yourself with food. And I think that that's exactly what happened. And the culture that I come from in northwestern part of India is a food culture. And you can argue which culture isn't a food culture, but specifically the Punjabi culture, there's a lot of emphasis on mothers cooking and grandmothers cooking, and it's got that Mediterranean style fervor, and people, you get together, you celebrate, and you feast and fast. And even when you're fasting, there's a specific diet for a fast, and that's oxymoronic, right? but anyhow, so
Well, the food becomes kind of a metaphor for the love and the cohesion between families and communities and so forth.
Exactly. So, he was an outcome of the period in which he was born in, and aren't we all? He was his illness and his reaction to his illness, his attempts at managing his illness was an outcome of the culture and the food culture that he was a part of. And I think that those are common denominators for persons suffering from chronic illness. But the nuance comes from whatever your culture tells you is good for you to eat or not good for you to eat.
And prior to losing your dad during COVID, you yourself had kind of a lightning bolt moment where your own health was taking a hit, largely due to the burnout you were experiencing, but perhaps not acknowledging.
You're absolutely right. And, now when I think about it, burnout has so many different components. One is a lifestyle component, one is how you respond to it. Because life's going to throw challenges. Not everyone is going to get burned out.
So as a high achiever, did that feel like something that was difficult for you to accept? Like, in other words, were you of the mindset that, no, burnout is something that happens to other people? I can handle all this and more?
Like I mentioned early on in our conversation, burnout is a badge of honor. So when you're receiving it as a badge of honor, you're not thinking about what it might be doing to corrode your mental health and your physical health. And that corrosion oftentimes is sinister. It brews very incrementally and slowly. And until you reach a point of no return, oftentimes that is, at a clinician's office when you get told that you have a diagnosis, because that's a point in time, right? That's the point in time when the HbA1c or the blood glucose levels go beyond a certain threshold, and then the medical fraternity sort of show you the yellow card, right? But some of these flags, the early yellow flags, and ultimately before it becomes a red flag, were there. And I think that the big worry at the back of my mind was always knowing what diabetes did to my father. And so my management and the response to some of these early diagnoses was a little different.
Okay.
I was not sedentary. I was going, and working out. I had personal fitness trainers and those sorts of things. I was looking at scientific studies around food. And the thing that I did not know, Michael, was that science isn't always necessarily scientifically valid, true, and factual. What can pass as science or pseudoscience oftentimes, and that is especially true for nutrition science, is when the industry gets together and funds certain research and then selectively cherry picks what they want people to know about either their products or certain modalities that they want to put their weight behind. And one such modality that has gained popularity over the last 10 to 15 years is ketogenic diet. People want to think about high performance. They want to think about beating back burnout by eating clean and ensuring that you have a clean fuel at a cellular metabolic level. And oftentimes that translates into shunning carbs. That somehow the fuel that you get from carbohydrate is dirty fuel, and what you get from animal protein and what you get from bullet coffee, which really is highly caffeinated beverage mixed with, a medium chain triglyceride like a coconut oil or something, and to dunk it before your strength training workout. And I fell prey to that. So as you can tell, The time period, which was about 10 years ago now, when I received my diagnosis, my reaction to it, my response to it, my perceived solutions for this, which I still perceived as, okay, my dad got it. This was my fate. It was my genetic destiny. Sooner than later, I would have been diagnosed. Now I have this diagnosis. How do I manage it? The set of solutions that I came up with was obviously an outcome of the media messaging and the marketing that I was surrounded by at that point in.
And I know that given your personal health experience, losing your dad, before we get to the film, there was the Gaia study. So let's talk about what the Gaia study was, the underpinnings of it, and the relationship between the Gaia study and essentially the thesis or the architecture of your film.
When my dad passed, about 8 weeks from then, in the middle of sort of grieving this very abrupt, tragic loss, I started thinking about what did the pandemic mean for me? Not only what it had taken away from me, but what it mean for me. And the one thing that I couldn't escape was the fact that both my parents, my mom and my dad, had been diagnosed on the same day. Both had gone to the hospital. One came back, the other didn't. And what was the difference? And they're exactly the same age. And the difference was lifestyle. The difference was food choices. The difference was in daily activity, frequency of activity, the quality and the nature of activity. And that, led to thinking about how might this translate if we were to look at persons with highly variable dietary preferences, activity preferences, and what did the pandemic mean for them? Not just from an infection standpoint, if they had that infection, but also from dealing with the challenge of living through this terrible, terrible time that we were going through as a civilization. And a couple of, healthcare providers we came together to conceive of this idea in spring of 2021. That's also around the time when I launched my nonprofit and the Divinity Research and Communications program. And we started shopping around for who could be the best, most credible data and research analysis partner for this type of a study. And given my background in corporate, marketing and research and market research and so on, I'd actually had an opportunity to work with some of the best global market research firms, and I knocked on several doors, and finally, Ipsos Global, their public affairs department, we found an ally and a champion in that team, and we went to field in October of 2021.
And how exhaustive was this study? And starting the study, what would you say? How would you finish this sentence? The objective of the study is to?
The objective of the study was twofold. We had a hypothesis. Can lifestyle impact an infectious disease outcome?
Okay.
Number one. And number two, what was the role of diet in that lifestyle toolkit as it correlated with the impact on a person's experience of infectious disease, both mentally and physically? And we were told that, usually if you have around 2,000 people, you get eye to eye, 1,000 people that eat really poorly and don't move at all, and then 1,000 people who really focus on their lifestyle and immunity and, good, clean eating choices, and they're moving very frequently. That is deemed to be a good enough data set,
Okay.
especially from, good data hygiene. You're going to get good, sound statistical results. Courtesy the team that we'd collected and the motivation of all the volunteers that had come together to form that initial team in the fieldwork phase of this project, we ended up reaching out to 50 plus organizations in the country to recruit and source a convenience sample. So Ipsos Global Public Affairs, they brought to us a national probability sample, which is curated through a proprietary tool that they have. It's called the Knowledge Panel. And that reflects on a normal curve what, the census report would tell us of how Americans eat.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to that, we also got a convenience sample, which is a random sample, by just disseminating the survey link through the help of these 50 plus organizations. And lo and behold, we were sitting at the end of field work on a data set with 20,000 respondents. And
Wow.
That's a large data set.
Yeah.
Which takes time to digest and metabolize and understand what it means. But also given the nature of the samples that we had, one was a national probability sample, the other was convenience sample, we also needed to find a bridge to be able to combine these two data sets in a sensible manner, because it's not a simple addition, because the basis of both the samples is so different. And that took time, that took a lot of experts. Thankfully, Ipsos was up to the job. We had chosen well in our research partner. And we soft released this research study, the infographic and the report. It's really exhaustive. And we built a special microsite for it. It's called the GaiaStudy.org. We released it in spring of 2024. But what we did before that was sort of digest all of this data and run a specific analysis based on that data. It's called a consumer segmentation analysis. And what it means is, were there any clusters of individuals that were naturally emergent from the different behaviors and motivations around lifestyle choices that we saw in the data set? And were these discrete clusters symbolic of the ways that these people had chosen to live and react to the pandemic, and how they were eating and how they were fueling themselves, and how, were they vaccinated, not vaccinated, those sorts of things. And this analysis is the gold of the Gaia study.
Okay.
And that gold, typically, when consumer segmentation analyses are done, in a consumer brands kind of a framework, it's syndicated studies. Nobody ever gets to know about it except the employees who've commissioned that study, and how they can use the findings to play their product portfolio better, launch a new brand variant, adjust their pricing strategy, turn it into an advertising campaign that would make sense, and so on. But in the nonprofit structure, what we did was we wanted to turn this consumer segmentation insights and evidence into storytelling. And that idea of weaving this into story then gave rise to the thought of creating a documentary film.
Creating a documentary. And you're a first-time documentary filmmaker. I know you had a co-director, Darren Suffolk. Had you ever watched documentaries before that took such a somewhat arcane, complex body of information that originated in, rigorous, maybe even academic study format, and then it was translated to be an engaging, highly visually engaging a documentary film? Was there any template that you had in mind, or any other documentary that might have served as an inspiration or an influence?
I wouldn't say template, but inspiration, yes.
Okay.
And there are a few different, works and even methods of journalism,
Mm-hmm.
And let me separate these two, because journalism, there's an overlap, obviously, between documentary film and solutions journalism. But again, they tend to be treated as two different, categories. So I would say from a documentary standpoint, I was very impressed with certain food and climate documentary films that have been, created over the past 15 years.
Okay.
Starting with An Inconvenient Truth, that talked about the climate issue mainly through the energy narrative and the fossil fuels, the fossil fuels issue that we have, but also from a food documentary standpoint. There was an early documentary called Food Incorporated. I don't
Sure.
know if you
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah. Food Inc. Yep.
Food Inc. There was another one called Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead,
Yes, I know that one also.
where that involved a lot of traveling. And ultimately, the guy was with his juicer and he was like going everywhere and, talking about juicing and how important greens are to our body. And then there were a couple of other documentary films, two Netflix documentary films that come to mind that were hugely influential in my own choices as they are at this point in time. One is a 2011 documentary film called Forks Over Knives.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
And the second was a James Cameron film called The Game Changers.
Okay. Yeah.
And The Game Changers specifically, given the big budget, that James Cameron and Susie Cameron are able to afford for their work, and it's heavily researched, there were pieces of it where there was animation and motion design, which kind of took you out from that talking heads format that documentary films tend to have. And sometimes it can grow weary because you're just looking at this expert and they're talking about things. But when you cut to animation and you look at a concept that may have been described before, but it's distilled and simplified in a really visual kind of a manner, I think that was very inspiring for me. On the solutions journalism side, Vox have traditionally, historically, produced stuff where they take some really complex, issues, either geopolitical or otherwise, or social in nature, and they distill it down. So that was definitely one, piece of inspiration that both Darren and I, early on in deciding what our format and what our methodology is going to be, we're really impressed with, and we wanted to see to the extent that we could incorporate it.
Yeah, and your film just so seamlessly and impactfully combines so many elements of documentary. There is the sort of talking heads, but I love the way they're all shot. They're not just heads. You get a full sense of the room and the environment and the full individuals. You have these really beautifully done maps, and the maps serve the purpose of being really a timeline, and you're mapping out these crucial points in really the history of industrial agriculture and economic systems and their connection to personal and maybe collective health, and then even larger than that, global health, which is a lot to bite off, but you do it quite successfully. And then you have this really great idea of casting these two individuals that I feel like serve as almost the surrogates for the audience, because they probably come in about 5 times throughout the film, 4 or 5 times, and in each instance, it's a breather. And it's an opportunity for the viewer to say, were you a little confused by that? How did we get from point A to point B? And the two individuals, the actors, are able to sort of interpret and bounce ideas and responses off each other. So hats off for that, number one, because it's a bit of hand holding, but it's done very artistically. How did that idea come about, particularly having the individuals who help sort of translate in real time?
The presence of these two time travelers, actors, Anna Jobertay and Richard Lund, it wasn't there in the beginning at all. So Darren and I and the rest of the team, Paul Matthews, our researcher, Matthew Pfeiffer, our scriptwriter, and various line producers, Ivan Rasgado, Ayes Alonso, and Anya Thompson, we were all very committed to the two pillars of storytelling that we had thought about. One is the interviews, and we were really determined and committed to the setup of those interviews in a really interesting way so that it was engaging, it was part of the story, it wasn't boring, you weren't zooming in onto people's heads and faces all the time. There was some breathing room that there's stuff in the back.
Yeah.
And oftentimes in relation to the work that these people do. So if it's somebody who's a breathwork teacher, you see them, placed in a yoga mat or a yoga cushion, and you have that kind of a background. So it adds to their role profile and their responsibility of their expertise in the documentary film. And the second thing that we were committed to was the quality and the framework around motion design and animation and things like that. And as the first edit came through, and the first edit, I mean, Darren cautioned me. He was like, Nivi, it's not going to make any sense. This is the messy middle. You're going to have a migraine headache. And sure I did, because I was panicking and I was like, Darren, this doesn't make any sense. We need to have some kind of logic. The subplots aren't adding up. And not that I'm bored, I'm actually freaking out because there's so much information.
Right.
So we kind of bore through it, and he and I had a conversation and, came to blows on a couple of, topics and things. And Darren's always been super sweet about it. And then we had the second edit, and by such time, me and my co-executive producer, Sean, we were sort of taking a step back and we were looking at this. And I think that Darren and Anya Thompson and everybody else, we all pretty quickly came to a realization that we had the motion design, we had the, how to simplify the complexity, we had the expertise, and all of that was beautifully shot. But we were missing the breathing. We were missing the engagement. We were missing the story. We were missing, well, not story, but we were missing, like, you've mentioned this so many times, how do the listeners, how do the somebody who's watching, how do the viewers perceive this? Are they going to see this as a data onslaught and an expertise onslaught and a lot of cool motion graphics? Or are we going to let them pause? And that storytelling inbuilt through these skits offer, that pause. And you mentioned 5, and I remember talking to Darren about how many do you need for people to even, register that this is happening? Because when you're trying to introduce this device in documentary filmmaking, you also have to train the viewer's eye, and you have to build that anticipation that these 2 time travelers are going to keep coming back and to expect them to come back. So they actually appear 15 times, Michael.
Oh, wow. Really? It seemed less to me.
Yeah. And so that was what led to this entire section, which again had to be very carefully choreographed and interstitially sort of dropped into the rest of the edit.
Right.
For it to make sense. And in doing so, we had to go through this major matrix of different topics that we wanted to allude to. We were already alluding to our experts in their interviews we're talking about, but which ones were important enough for us to tease out and turn into scripted skits.
Mm-hmm. And as a first-time documentary filmmaker, tell me a little bit about the process of deciding that you wanted to work with Darren Suffolk on this as a co-director. What did you see in his existing body of work that made you feel like this person has the experience and the talent and kind of gets it and is going to be able to help us, take numbers and data and turn it into engaging visuals and storytelling?
That's a really cool story behind this, how I discovered, Darren and how I discovered him through Superside, which is his employer, the organization that he works for. So after having finished the Gaia study, or still, the statistical analysis had happened, but we hadn't yet, launched the report. And I was still sort of noodling over in terms of how do you bring these insights to life? Do you put it in a microsite? Do you actually approach a journal and write, some kind of an article and have it published in that way? So distribution. How do you distribute? Now that you have these insights. So I was sitting on it and I was thinking about how do we do it? How do we do it in a direct to consumer kind of a way? So before I discovered Darren's work and Superside, there was a milestone in the middle, which is very briefly alluded to in the film. It was a social lab experiment that we did in Massachusetts. And we recruited about 15 people, entirely random sample, blindfolded them, got them to taste 5 different plant-based products, which were lookalikes of traditionally, what would be meat and dairy products and so on. And we asked them to fill out some forms and things like that. And that was all video recorded. And we were really curious as to how we could take the Gaia study and its insights and the results from this video recorded social lab experiment and overlay upon that climate-based storytelling. Because up until now, the Gaia study is pandemic and burnout and lifestyle choices. This one is more around food choices and some conversations with certain experts that we subsequently did along with the blind taste testing with these respondents. And how do you overlay climate and so on? So I had many ideas in my mind in terms of how we take these 2 bodies of work and the aspiration of overlaying expert opinion around climate and climate anxiety and so on. And I started looking around for a very specific type of creative partner. And so I was looking, and my search really involved, number one, they need to be able to understand commercial advertising, because that's the background I come from, and I know that in health-based or planet and climate change-based public messaging, we rarely ever achieve the sophistication of commercial consumer marketing and consumer advertising. So I wanted to work with a creative partner that understood the ethos of that and would bring that production value and quality, and a product orientation, with that. The second thing was, did they have scale? Did they have a large team? Would they be able to bring specialists and assemble a bespoke team with all the different ideas that I had in mind, with motion graphics and animation, because not every production house has
Service
that,
sure.
Yeah, so either you can have great cinematography, or you can have this, or you can have great AI usage and leveraging some of those new technologies. And in interviewing many, I finally zeroed in on to Superside. And when we got into, extended sort of conversations around how this would be realized and manifested, my point of contact introduced me to one of their creative services director, who was, Darren. And when I looked at Darren's profile, he's done amazing work commercially, but he's also done work for the BBC. He has, a lot of work along with the BBC in the educational space, specifically in advanced physics, and how do you distill some of those very complicated scientific ideas into something that is simpler, bearing in mind student audiences.
Sure.
So all of this seemed to be sort of coming together in a really nice way. And when we started discussing all of my other ideas, Darren very generously, offered to assemble a team from within Superside, which he believed could service this specific project. And this is not only my first long format documentary film, this is also Superside's first, foray, and hopefully not the last. But they typically do commercial work. They were a terrific partner, and I've formed what have turned into lasting friendships with many members of our team.
And that aesthetic that aesthetic that consumers are going to be, I'm not going to call them consumers, I'm going to call them viewers, right? That audience members are going to be identifying with is right there. And maybe they won't be aware of it, but they are recognizing it as consumers, as targets of, multinational companies with multi-million dollar advertising and marketing budgets, which is, hats off to you in sort of taking that approach, because oftentimes I think in the documentary world, that type of, for lack of a better term, polish might be viewed as, oh, this is too slick. But the fact of the matter is that your audience has been predisposed to accepting messaging that's packaged in a certain way. And, I think it lends credibility and certainly professionalism. And really, what more important product, I guess, could you be marketing than the message within your film?
Yeah, thank you for, saying that, Michael. First of all, I'm so glad, that when you looked at our work, you received it as such. We intended for it absolutely to have that production values, the production quality that people are used to when they're looking at a McDonald's commercial.
Sure.
Like food advertising is visceral.
Right.
There's for a reason why they show you the strings of cheese, and I'm not even going to get into the fact that sometimes that is not cheese at all.
Yes, I know.
It's glue, right? Yeah. So there's been plenty of exposés around that, with the democratization that social media has afforded us. We know what happens behind food commercials, but nevertheless, every single time you see it, it triggers your taste buds.
Right.
It's your salivary glands, and we're back to Pavlov's, classical conditioning and so on. So I wanted that, for lack of a better word, or maybe this is the right word, I wanted that deliciousness.
Sure.
To the experience.
Right.
You have to savor every frame, because if you're not savoring every frame, there is going to be a retention problem.
Right.
You'll have audience falling out, and you don't want that attrition to happen in the early parts of the long format documentary feature, because we're still building up to the point that we want to make. And that building up isn't for just the sake of it and whatever, but there are a lot of connecting the dots and so many micro data points that we're trying to put together, just because of the enormity of the task of this film. So for you to say and to be so complimentary of it, I think this is all credit to Darren and his team. They certainly
and
outdid
yourself
themselves. Thank you. And they outdid themselves, in terms of packaging it together, which is so important.
So I know now that you're very busy making the rounds of a lot of film festivals, and it's been it certainly has been a beneficial experience, because you're winning all sorts of awards. So just bring us up to speed a little bit about the accolades the film is receiving on the festival circuit.
I'm pinching myself as we talk. It's very challenging and nerve-wracking to have birthed a product such as this, for the first time, with the village that that I worked with, and we had our heads down. A lot of people didn't even know that we were working on this project. And finally, to have it be seen by different audiences, it's anxiety-provoking every single time, Michael. And at our world premiere in New York City at the Greenpoint Film Festival, I was actually ready to sort of leave right after our screening. And obviously, all the film festivals, they run for 4 days, and, there's a specific slot that you're given, and you do a post-screening Q&A and everything. And I was all set. I was called up Sean, it's a 35-minute flight. I'm just going to head out. When the producer and the founders, of the film festival, they kept coming to me and they said, "You're staying for awards night, right?" And they obviously wanted to ensure that I was staying, but at the same time, they didn't want to let the cat out of the bag, right? And in my naivete, this is, mind you, the first ever film festival for me, first time participating in one, first time screening in one. This is our world premiere. This is happening August 9th, 2025. And I keep thinking, maybe they don't have enough people joining them for awards night. They want me to stay. And that certainly wasn't the case. This is this film festival is run for 15 years. It's a very prestigious film festival. And they announced all the smaller awards before, and then we got Best Documentary Feature.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe myself. I didn't have a speech. I wasn't ready for it. So I said what I did on stage. It was completely authentic, therefore, and straight from the heart in the moment. And since then, the recognition that this film has received across the film festival circuit has just been amazing. And not only that, you'd think that with all the climate change denial that exists in the world, and especially in certain geographies in our own country at this point, I had a feeling that maybe we would have better reception in certain areas, and therefore by certain film festivals, and some others would steer clear of it. But that's not been the case. And that, I believe, is at least in part testimony to the fact that we talk about some of these important things like public health and lifestyle change and food choices and carbon-intensive agriculture and climate change, but we talk about it through what's highly personally relevant to every single human being, no matter who you voted for, what your ideology is, and that is the idea around burnout. So if you're burned out and you care about understanding where it comes from, where it may have come from, what you can potentially do about it, this film does it, and hats off to all the different festival organizers, our film festival strategy and management and outreach team. They did a great job. Dr. Rebecca Louisa Smith and her associate Lauren Pizzicaroli, both of them helped us with this film festival strategy, and it seemed to have worked, and we've screened at over 15 national and international film festivals, and so far the film has won 12 awards, including a couple of awards in Best Editing, Best Story and Narrative Structure, Best Sound Engineering. David Grevler, he's a well-known name in sound design. He's based in South Africa, and Dave's work in sound design has been incredible.
Yeah, I think because it checks all those boxes, and that first box actually being entertaining because of the quality of the aesthetic. It is entertaining, it is informative, and it's empowering that you're providing the viewers with this body of information that is sort of channeled through individual stories and individual commentary, and you come away feeling that, yeah, it's on a personal level, burnout can be a lot to sort of wrap your head around and deal with. Certainly, if you extrapolate that out to how that impacts climate change and they feed off of each other, that can feel overwhelming. But the key to not feeling overwhelmed is to feel informed and empowered. And that is what Third Degree Burnout most definitely does. So, Nivi, tell us how listeners can learn more about the film, how people who might be interested in distributing the film can learn more about the film and about you and your mission.
Thank you for that, Michael. A film is only a film of this nature, right? A documentary film is only as useful as it creates and sparks dialogue, and it continues the stories and the content that we've already started to build, with this film. And towards that end, at our nonprofit, which is the Versa Foundation, and and the Divinity Research Program, we've worked with students at UC Berkeley to produce a cache of burnout awareness resources. These are available for free for anyone who wants to go on our website, which is thirddegreeburnout.com. And they can see across our core values that are embedded in the film, which are resilience, boundaries, choices, evidence, insight. Across all of these 5 core principles, you can see along the duality of what's personal and planetary, you can look at amazing in-depth burnout awareness resources that the students have created as part of a course that happens in UC Berkeley in partnership with an amazing organization, the executive director of which is featured in our documentary film. They're called Plant Futures Initiative. So that's one. The second is what's in store for us in the new year, in 2026. In 2026, we want to make more impact. We want to get as many audiences, different, diverse groups of people, professional associations, colleges, universities, to be able to see this content. And hopefully, get a broadcaster to sort of pick up the film as well. And towards that, towards keeping this conversation alive, I'm busy, working to put together what's called the Beyond Burnout Coalition. And this Beyond Burnout Coalition, a hope in action, this is the concept or the umbrella concept for our future content, for our future coalitional conversations, for people. It's an invitation for people from diverse backgrounds to come and join. Hopefully there's podcast dialogue, also as part of that we're able to curate. Pending funding, because we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're a startup nonprofit. We're still really young, a team of one, and opportunistically sort of working with these amazing, incredible, research firms and production partners and so on, and hoping to work with impact producers and other producers who can help us make this content for distribution as well. So fundraising is a key component. That's a way to support this movement that we're building. There is a donate page on our websites. Very happy to share that link with you. And please, have a look at our coalition section and learn about the coalition. We have a founding circle. We also have expert allies that we're going to be sending out invitations to and hopefully bringing them on board and having them talk to us about some of the core principles that we want to talk about. And the burnout awareness resources. And one more thing, I worked with this incredible young man. He is based in Argentina. His name is Martin Hayek, and Martin is an amazing information architect in the IT industry. And he suffered from burnout. And he and we got together and we created an app.
Oh, wow.
And this app is also on the website. And it's a free, engaging tool. We don't collect any personal data. Whatever you share and input into the app is something that is just for your consumption. And what it actually shows, it shows you your burnout story. And the stripes are blue and in different shades of red, very similar to climate stripes that we're all so accustomed to seeing at this point in time. Like whenever you see a barcode kind of a thing with blue stripes and red stripes, we all know by now, these are some of the years that the earth was cooler and these are some of the years that the earth has, warmed up. So we took the same visual impact and we've actually turned it into a product. It's an app, completely free for everybody, and you can input some of the information, personal information it asks for. It's completely anonymized, and it generates for you what could be your own burnout stripes. And it could show you some of the years where you experienced burnout, but also some of the years where you demonstrated resilience and you found solutions and things got better. So it's a really, we've been told it's a really engaging tool. it's something that we hope to create certain tools like workshops and curriculum around, and to expose it to students and populations that are vulnerable to burnout.
Well, I will make sure that all the necessary URLs to the various websites are included in the program notes for this particular podcast episode and in all the material that we use along social media to promote this conversation and your film. And I assume there's someone in your corner who's reminding you every now and again to monitor your burnout as you market and try to get a distributor and so forth for your film about burnout.
Yes, I do. Sometimes, as they say, therapists need therapists, right? And coaches need coaches, and so on. I depend a lot on my very supportive husband, Sean Wirchus, who's been along, this entire journey. And without his support, none of what I do would have been possible. And I'm blessed with, amazing set of friends who I can count on, and some of my own practices. And these practices are courtesy lifestyle changes that I've stumbled upon over the past years. And the core motivation to make a documentary film such as this is that people don't stumble upon this information, that it's part of our media messaging. And Michael, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Well, we've been talking about third degree burnout. As you've heard, it is gaining all sorts of awards and accolades on the festival circuit. One hopes and predicts that in 2026, the general public will be able to find this film in one way or another. And we'll be sure to keep everybody in the loop in terms of the journey that third degree burnout is taking. Nivi, thank you for your time. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Michael.
There's a place, a garden for the young, to laugh and dance in safety among the shimmering light and the shade of the trees. Steal a bite and paradise is lost. With darkened hearts we didn't count the cost, forgot all we left behind. Life picks up speed before you know, we hold on for dear life, oh Lord. We're too proud to turn back now. One day it all falls down and breaks our heart, and it breaks our crown, brings us down where we see it's gonna be alright. Turn around and let back in the light. Enjoy